Brexit is still happening. Theresa May was able to go to European leaders and get a delay now till October. I believe it's Halloween. And basically, there was supposed to be a hard date to leave in late April. Instead, there's been a short-term extension. I'm quoting now from Vox. There's been a short-term extension of Article 50 from the EU leaders, moving the date from March 29th to April 12th. That was the first move. And now she ended up getting, and I'm going to quote one more time, EU leaders, after much debate, agreed to postpone Brexit again, but this time until October 30th. The EU did give the UK an option to leave earlier if Parliament managed to pass a Brexit deal before them, but the country still must participate in European parliamentary elections between May 23rd and 26th. If it does not, the UK will leave the EU without a deal on June 1st. So this will put them, again, there's a European Parliament, different European countries field candidates from different political parties, and then there's different political blocs inside the European Parliament, and the UK will be in the extraordinarily awkward position of fielding candidates during this ridiculous process. And a main sticking point, of course, is things like, what will the trade relationship be between the UK and the European Union? That's still a major source, obviously, for the UK, even though they have strong trading partnership, obviously, with the United States and trading partners in Asia and Africa. But the Eurozone is still a major source for the United Kingdom. Then there's the fact that the Good Friday peace accords and essentially a semblance of peace and stability, which is not on a super robust foundation in Northern Ireland, because a lot of the political divisions that were created through British colonialism there are still alive in terms of a lot of group separation between Protestants and Catholics, and very different perceptions, obviously, of whether or not Northern Ireland should be in the United Kingdom. In fact, a extremist royalist party is part of this extremist Tory coalition governing the UK right now. So coming up with the so-called backstop, something that will not close that border, which is what allows the Good Friday agreements to exist. Essentially, the agreement has found a loophole in that the Northern Ireland is obviously not declared, it's not independent, it's not a part of Ireland, but there's an open border between Ireland, which is part of the European Union, and Northern Ireland. So people who want to feel part of a united Ireland or a more independent country generally can use that borders. That needs to be preserved, or this whole significant accomplishment of Good Friday could be blown up. And you already see, by the way, a lot of tremors in Ireland of things like potential rearmament and polarization, which is incredibly dangerous in this context. All that being said, we're going to go to Jeremy Corbyn in a second. And of course, Jeremy Corbyn is a figure that is relentlessly under assault from the right in the UK, from the tabloid press, from the Blairite right wing of the Labour Party. There's a huge amount of disdain for him in the United States. Jeremy Corbyn is not perfect, but we can obviously be very clear that a vast majority of this disdain is because he's running on a genuine democratic socialist message. And he's talking about dealing with the systems crisis that the United Kingdom has been in, along with, of course, the rest of the world, essentially, since the Thatcher-Reagan era. That's what this is about. If this was just about anti-Semitism, you would have plenty of examples in the Tory party. And if this was also just about anti-Semitism, you would not be equating the profound danger of anti-Semitism and evil of anti-Semitism with, of course, correct critiques of the Israeli government for its policies towards Palestinians, conflating those things as disingenuous and dangerous, period, wherever it exists. So what Jeremy Corbyn has actually put forward is, first of all, having a customs union so that essentially trade can continue with the European Union and the Eurozone. Then there's the question of the open movement of open borders and free movement of people. This is something that Labor, from a left perspective, has not been great on under Corbyn, and that is what people probably in the left of Labor are most concerned about preserving, although I have to say, presumably, a lot of the more blue-collar areas that voted for Brexit that are labor-leaning, I doubt they're particularly committed to that political project necessarily. But that's an area, obviously, that's worth fighting for. And incidentally, that's an area where arch anti-Brexiteers like Tony Blair, of course, have been most willing to compromise. They're concerned about the freedom of capital, not so concerned about violence towards different populations at a border. But it's something, again, we need to be politically realistic about. Then there's the idea that you constantly hear in the press here, and you constantly hear in the UK, there just needs to be a people's referendum. There'll be another referendum, and then this crisis will be solved. No polls and no shifts in the Brexit conversation indicate that this people's referendum would pass. In fact, polls show it's still really tight, and you could be in an even more disastrous situation where you have continued to set all politics on hold. You've reduced all of the UK crises, which are multifold. There's a crisis of austerity emanating from their own policies after Gordon Brown was taken out of office in 2010. There's the longer-term structural crisis, which is coming to a head across the globe, going back to the late 70s and 80s. There's obviously, like everywhere else, there's an ecological crisis. There's also the fact that regardless even of Brexit, the Tory party has adopted some of the most vicious, racist, anti-immigrant policies of the Western world right now. So what Corbyn and Labour have actually been attempting to do, in addition to saying we need to have an election because this is a shambolic government which is horrible to people and simply cannot function, and we need to go to the polls, period, has also been trying to say we need to solve the problems out of Brexit while also addressing the systems crisis in the UK, all of which gets no attention in the Western press. So this is Jeremy Corbyn discussing his, first of all, Theresa May finally reaching out to him to collaborate on Brexit as the crisis is intensified, and his stance on the broader process.
When the Prime Minister announced she wanted to speak to me to find a Brexit compromise, I very generously agreed. I didn't have any advance notice of her invitation, by the way. I found out when I heard it on television, which we turned on in my office as I was meeting a cooperative group of MPs. And they very generously said, you don't need to spend too long answering our questions because we think you've got something else to do now. But it is scandalous that it came so late in the Brexit process. Not at the 11th hour. Not even at 5 to midnight, but at 5 past midnight, after the Prime Minister had missed her own deadline of the 29th of March. Nevertheless, we're engaging in talks in a serious and constructive way. But we must see those red lines moving, and we must see real compromise by the government. And I have to say, it's a challenge to negotiate with a government that is collapsing all around us. When you can't be sure if commitments made by the Prime Minister will survive the week, and when Cabinet collective responsibility has given way to collective irresponsibility, with ministers battling it out on the airwaves. Nearly everyone now agrees that the Prime Minister could and should have tried to build a consensus much earlier. We might be in a very different place if she had, but instead, she stuck rigidly to a flawed plan. She ran down the clock and ran out of time. The extension she's had to agree is a result of her failure and is yet another milestone in this government's mishandling of all aspects of Brexit.
There's no doubt about that. And of course, Jeremy Corbyn, always much clearer and reasonable speaker when he isn't being misrepresented and smeared by the media. Now, Corbyn's been really clear. He's going to respect the results of the referendum, and he has called, in his own words, says there needs to be access to European markets, and above all, there needs to be a dynamic relationship to protect the conditions and rights we've got for the environment and consumer and workplace rights. We've put those cases very robustly to the government, and there's no agreement on it as yet. Now, of course, the Tory government wants to undermine the European Union standards and do away with them. They're a right-wing government. They don't want labor protections. They don't want environmental protections. Absolutely, any economic crisis will be used as a cudgel to destroy things like the NHS. Now, that being said, Corbyn is both actually being more strategic than most people talking about Brexit realize, because a people's referendum could be actually an extraordinary disaster. And he also represents a left anti-European Union position. Grace Blakely, who hopefully will be a guest on this show soon, who's an economic advisor to Corbyn, has called for a left Lexit, a left Brexit. And her argument, and the argument of this position, is really simple. It's that fundamentally the left project is opposed to transnational financial institutions writing the rules of economics for, in this case, sovereign countries, but also more broadly what is possible in any type of global effort. Adom Keciuciu noted the role of the World Bank and IMF, the Western financial order, destroying the Third World Project, the post-empire project. So there is a left case here against institutions like the European Union. Now, as Blakely says, relative to the World Bank and the IMF, the European Union actually stands out because they do provide a modicum of labor and environmental and other crucial standards. That's why there was a point, particularly in the late 80s, where a fair amount of people on, as an example, the UK left were willing to say, okay, let's stick close to the European Union because obviously it's better for an American model from the perspective of human well-being. That being said, the more ambitious parts of the labor agenda, like turning small and mid-sized businesses, if they want to get a government grant to turn them into workers' cooperatives, like a much broader effort to seriously democratize the UK economy, that will run up against the European Union at some point. Now, I am intellectually compelled by the Lexit position. The trouble is there was never that position in the offing. The reality is that Brexit was definitely driven by a combination of broad anti-establishment politics, xenophobia and racism, and also people with right-wing agendas for the British economy. Again, people who want no standards coming from anywhere, period. People who do want to Singaporeize the UK. And there were a small group of people on the left that supported Brexit because of the correct concerns that they have identified earlier. The question now is how Corbyn can synthesize the right strategy for getting to electorate as quickly as possible, not obscuring the structural crises just in Brexit, maintaining what the UK needs inside the European system, and potentially, if possible, re-leveraging a Brexit process, if it continues, for that Lexit position. But that's going to require, as all of these projects, a huge amount of ground-up work. And I still would maintain that the most important and sort of immediate crisis thing, and what is owed and obligated the most, is steps to protect the Good Friday Accords and the people of Ireland, who, again, we should not forget, are still, and historically much more extremely, have been colonial subjects of the United Kingdom. That's the Brexit update, everybody. And I have to say, it was frankly not bad. Packed in a lot of information. A lot of information. You a Lexit guy, Griscom?
You seem to be a bit of a glum bucket.
Who does? Theresa May?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean,
Brussels.
Brussels, yeah.
Brussels.
There's a lot of glumbuckery in this whole conversation.
I definitely understand where, the European Union was definitely a neoliberal project. But I do agree that given the character of the way that this exit is going right now, that we're not seeing a moment where people are trying to, democratize their economy. They're very much fighting against this very xenophobic and rising right in the UK. So you have to find a balance of that. I will say that I think that Corbyn has been very good at trying to find a good balance between trying to renegotiate certain relationships with the European Union, while also hopefully being able to get away from some of the aspects of regulation which are meant to maintain finance capital.
That's exactly right. I think you got to get your nemesis at the door, and then you can do your segment. Richard Wolff should be entering the studio momentarily to knock. Wow, David's getting very slow up from the chair. He's not moving that fast. He's not. The drum roll is on. Hey, there they are. David was quite nervous. Professor, Wow, I like that Professor Wolf has his leather jacket on, and you could see he's not coming here to play. David was very nervous opening the door. He walked very slowly to it. Don't overcompensate. It's okay. You've just watched a Michael Brooks show video, and you can watch all of our full main live shows every Tuesday night at around 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and subscribe to get all of the clips you want. We're covering the globe. We're focusing on international relations, the intellectual dark web. We're having fun. We're doing deep dives with a lot of amazing guests. Of course, become a patron for the whole thing at patreon.com/TMBS, or subscribe to this YouTube channel and help us keep growing and get that content out there. Subscribe below.